Okay, so this is then part 2 of the lecture on Descartes, and we stopped with the discussion of I think, therefore I am. So make sure in your papers that you're able to say what Descartes' project is, first of all, why he is looking for this truth. Say what the truth is, I think, therefore I am. In other words, the mind exists. And I know that based on logic or reason, rationality alone. Given that Descartes was a rationalist, it makes a lot of sense that the foundational truth upon which he builds all of the other truths of the world is one gotten to by reason alone, rather than empirical data. Okay, so make sure you understand that. Now, the second thing, after, in the notes, after I put in cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, to the third bullet point in that little section, I've written mind and body are separate. Mind can exist without body, paragraph 2. If you look at the bottom of paragraph 2, go 4 lines up from the bottom, so that I, that is to say, the mind by which I am what I am, is wholly distinct from the body, and is even more easily known than the latter. The mind is more easily known than the body, and is such that although the latter, that if the body were not in existence, it would still continue to be all that it is. If the body did not exist, the mind would still exist. This is where we get an inkling of Descartes' notion of the immortal soul. And he absolutely believed that once the body dies, the soul / mind / consciousness, whatever word you want to use there, continues to exist. Remember, he is a theist, so that makes some sense. I noted in paragraph 2 another quote. I highlighted them while I'm uploading the first video. I went and highlighted all of the quotes that I'll pull out. So now you can see the one that I highlighted in whatever color that is, brick red or something. From the very circumstance that I thought to doubt of the truth of other things, it most clearly and certainly followed that I was. That means that I exist. Okay? He's just restating there the idea of I think, therefore I am. And remember, in your papers, it's not enough to just say, Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. Next point. That, nope, you have to explain what that means. Why does he care about it? Why was he searching for that truth? And what the hell does it mean? Because I'm sure you've heard that phrase before and you didn't know what it meant. It means that if I'm thinking, I must exist by logic. Something must exist to do the thinking. If an action is taking place, you have to have a subject that is doing the action. Actions don't exist without a subject. This is Descartes' idea. So if he's doubting or thinking or questioning or believing or praying or picking his nose, something has to exist to do any of those things. So that's what it means. It follows from the very circumstance that I'm doubting truths of things, even of myself, that I must exist because there's an action taking place. A subject has to do an action. Okay? So that's that. Now, I've written in the notes then this important question, and this is what you have to answer in your papers. How does the proof of the existence of the mind allow me to prove the existence of the body in the external world? Remember, Descartes doesn't want to just stop there. What he's trying to do, he's not trying to say that actually God or the body or the external world don't exist. What he's doing is a standardly enlightenment project and saying, I've been told these things exist, they seem to exist, but I'm tired of taking the word of everybody else. I have the ability to look into things for myself, find truths for myself, use my reason myself. It's dangerous to just let everybody else do the thinking for me and never think through my beliefs on my own. It's dangerous not to reflect on my own beliefs because other human beings do not always have our best interest in mind when they tell us certain things. And because people throughout history have not doubted what leaders or authorities or institutions have told them, they've been severely oppressed. Human beings use that sheep-like mentality of just following blindly without questioning to oppress people, to use them, manipulate and exploit them. This is what history has shown us. It is absolutely imperative, say men like Descartes and other Enlightenment thinkers, that we think through these things ourselves. And if we find out that they're full of crap, that our leaders and authority figures are leading us astray, they're probably doing it on purpose so that they can tyrannize us. And the history of the world has shown us that governments and religious institutions have done that quite often to the people. And it's important that we become learned, that we use our brains, that we use our reason, that we exercise our reason, and that we don't listen to other people, that we find out truths for ourselves so that we have less of a chance of being tyrannized. This is important. And any government or religion that suggests that doubting or questioning is a sin or is wrong or illegal or a reflection of a flaw in you, that you don't believe or you don't have faith, or that you're showing disrespect, any government or religion that says that, you should be wary of. Very, very wary. Anybody who is full of real integrity, who really thinks that they have a good reason that you should believe and maintain what they believe and maintain, anybody who feels that way about his beliefs will be happy for you to question them, because he will say, you question them all you want. You should come to them on your own. You shouldn't just listen to me. You should come to believe them by deeply experiencing them, feeling them, or by figuring out that there's real logical data in support of them. And go ahead and question them all you want, because you know what? I know they're right. You're going to come to them too eventually. I'm not worried about it. So by all means, doubt, question all you want. Don't listen to me. Find out for yourself. Any group, governing body, religion, whatever it is, that is not trying to in some way lead you astray will be happy to let you doubt and discover the truth for yourself. And anybody who thinks, for instance here, the Buddha is one, anybody who thinks that he really truly has figured it out and that it's waiting for everyone else to figure it out too, will say, in fact, you're not doing it right if you don't doubt. This is a standard tenet of Buddhism. If you don't find it out for yourself, if you only listen to the Buddha scriptures or whatever, you're not being a Buddhist. A Buddhist discovers the truth of enlightenment for himself through experience. And Descartes says something similar. I I'm not being fully human if I don't discover for myself why I believe these things, if I don't discover evidence for them. If I just follow blindly like a sheep, I am not human. Because human beings have the most extraordinary opportunities for greatness by using their reason to discover truth. And no other creature can do that. And remember what Pico said. We have the opportunity that not even angels have. We have the opportunity not just to be God-like, but to be one with God. If we choose to reach for that kind of greatness. If we don't choose that, if we choose to be plant-like or animal-like, well, we're not fulfilling our potential. And these guys obviously put a value judgment on that choice. If you choose to be a sheep, you have chosen wrongly. And it's shameful. This is pretty typical of humanist thinking, that we not only have the opportunity, but a real human responsibility to choose greatness, to choose to be extraordinary. Always ask yourself what you've chosen to be. Every day, every ethical dilemma in which you find yourself. If you've chosen greatness, or if you've chosen complacency. These are important questions. But never forget that we have the choice. So, to move then from the mind, the existence of the mind, to the existence of everything else, we need to realize that, well, in the first place, Descartes wants to move from one to the next. He wants to figure out why there's a good reason to believe that these things exist, rather than taking them on faith alone. So he says, okay, well, I can't go directly from the mind to the external world. That is, just because I've proven that the mind exists, it does not then follow that because my mind experiences my body in the external world, that those things exist. Because my mind experiences those things when I'm sleeping, so to speak, in a dream, but they don't really exist in the dream. It's a dream. So I can't go directly from the proof of the mind, the existence of the mind, to the existence of the external world and my body. Just because the mind exists, there isn't a necessary link, logically, between my mind and the existence of those other things. I've got to do something else first. And here's what he does. The next thing that he proves instead is the existence of God. Once he figures out that God exists, and that God exists in the way that, of course, Christians define God, in particular, as benevolent, a loving God, which is not the only way to think of God. But he was he's a Christian, so that's how he thinks of God. Once he proves the existence of this kind of God, then everything else follows. But let's see that. So the way that we move from the existence of the mind to the existence of the body in the external world is by first proving the existence of God. And here's the direct connection that he starts out with. So, by the way, these are called, I'm not going to really explain this. You don't need to know that. If this were a philosophy class, it would be a different story, but I'm not going to do it here. These are called the ontological arguments. The ontological argument is very old. The word ontological means of being, the nature, the essence of a thing. Ontology is the study of being. Okay? The ontological argument is very old. Long before Descartes, other philosophers used versions of the ontological argument, and he is he's using them here too. So he's not the only guy, he's not the one who technically originally came up with these arguments, so don't fault him too much. They're bad. They're terrible arguments, okay? Everybody knows that. No philosopher now or after Descartes took them seriously as actual proofs for the existence of God. Nobody is persuaded that God exists by reading these arguments. They look pretty good on the surface in terms of logic. They look pretty good, but there are serious flaws with them. I'm not going to go through all of that. You need to just take my philosophy class if you want to learn more about that, or another philosophy class. But just for now, this is just a sort of intro into starting to think about things in a new way, okay? So he provides two ontological arguments. In your papers, you only have to talk about one. You can choose either one. It doesn't matter. But you only need to explain one of them. And I'm saying that because I want you to do it thoroughly, okay? So, the first thing, this is how he starts. And the ontological arguments are in, the two versions are in paragraphs 4 and 5. So the first one is in paragraph 4. So he looks back to his project, and he realizes that his project is one of doubting the existence of things. And he realizes that doubt is something that he's doing, or that is existing, or happening, or whatever you want to say, in his mind, okay, in his consciousness. So that's the initial direct link between these two arguments, between the argument for the existence of the mind and the argument for the existence of God. Doubting is happening in my mind, and specifically, doubting is an imperfection, I notice. The only reason I doubt anything is because I don't have certainty. Right? Well, if I had certainty of something, and it was authentic certainty, sometimes I feel like I'm certain about something, but I'm totally wrong, I'm mistaken. Okay, let's assume that I have actual certainty. I'm not at all mistaken. And that's happened before, too. I've been certain, and I was totally right. So, let's assume that I have authentic certainty about something. That is knowledge. Right? The only reason I ever doubt anything is because I don't have certainty. I don't have knowledge. I'm unsure. I'm uncertain. I don't know. Okay, think about the idea of God. Is God ever going to sit there and be like, you know what? I don't know if we went over that last time. I forget where we are in the book. Oh, jeez. You know what? I don't remember what room number he said the meeting was in. Oh, I'm not certain. Okay, God is never going to do that, right? Nope. God will always know the answer. God has perfect knowledge, okay? God is omniscient, knows everything. So God is always certain. If I am not, because I am doubting, which is happening in my mind, then that means I lack knowledge. which means I have an imperfection. I'm not perfect. God, being a perfect being, would never lack any knowledge. That's an aspect of God's perfection. So he says, well, now this is interesting. So, I'm thinking about this doubting and the fact that it's an imperfection. And if it's an imperfection, then I'm also thinking about the opposite side of the coin, perfection. But I'm not perfect. I mean, I just noted a flaw right there. Doubt. Lack of knowledge. I don't know anything that's perfect. I've never seen anything perfect. Where the hell did I get this idea of perfection from? It couldn't have come from me, because this is very important. If you see premise number 5, I've written the steps of the logical argument. Premise number 5, we can only create that which is equal to or inferior to ourselves. A creator cannot put more into a creation than he has within himself. This is controversial somewhat, but Descartes doesn't think so. The nice example to use is an oven. If an oven is you set it to 375 degrees, it's never going to heat a cake that you put into it to 450 degrees. It's never going to do that. It does not have the capacity to put more heat into the cake than it has within it. How can it possibly do that? So, I can't, being that I'm an imperfect being, you can't be perfect and imperfect. Like, you can't have both of those qualities. You can only have one. If you're perfect, then you lack imperfections. If you're imperfect, you lack perfections. You can only have one of those. Given that I am an imperfect being, I therefore lack perfection. How did I create the idea of perfection that's happening in my mind as I'm sitting here thinking about all of this stuff? Well, the answer is that I didn't create it. It came from something else. I'm not perfect, therefore I cannot create the idea of perfection. Now, it logically follows then that the only thing which can create the idea of perfection is a perfect being, because a creator can only put into a creation what it has, no more than what it has. So everything seems to be that I ever experience in the world seems to be imperfect. The only thing is some perfect being. That's the only thing that could create the idea of perfection, which I'm sitting here thinking about. It's in my mind. I'm thinking about it. It came from somewhere. It couldn't come from me. It had to come from a perfect being. Therefore, a perfect being must exist. Okay, I know it's a bad argument. Don't worry, I know. But it's an important argument, and that's why, well, one of the reasons why we're reading it. Have you ever tried to think logically about why you believe in God, or have you just been a sheep? Even if Descartes didn't do it, pretty impressive that he's given it a shot. Moreover, this, well, anyway, never mind. So that's one of the arguments. And notice how there's a direct correlation between the first argument for the cogito and this argument for God. I established that the mind exists. Now I'm sitting here thinking about all the things that are in my mind. And I'm thinking about doubting. I realize that doubting is an imperfection. I realize that the opposite of imperfection is perfection. I realize that I couldn't have come up with the idea of perfection because I am not perfect. I realize then something perfect must have come up with the idea of perfection. Therefore, something perfect must exist. Because there's no other way for me to have gotten the idea of perfection. By the way, I didn't put this in here. It is another important tenet of the argument, but this is already kind of complex. He also denies the idea that I could have gotten the idea of perfection from nothing. The term is ex nihilo, out of nothing. He says, and this is another argument entirely, and it's too much, but I'll point it out in case you're sitting here thinking about his flaws, and you're thinking about why couldn't it have just popped into existence out of nowhere? Like, why does it have to have a creator? He denies that, and in fact most philosophers don't like that idea that something comes from nothing. It looks like something has to come from something, but it can only be something that is equal to or greater than the creation. Okay, so just... Anyway, the premises and the conclusion that I have put in your notes are what you would need to be able to explain for the paper. And it will not count if you just write those out in the same way that I did. Like you're just cutting and pasting. That does not illustrate to me in your paper that you understand the argument. You need to be able to explain them in your own words. And feel free to quote what I've written in the notes, and then just cite, my last name, class notes, or something. Feel free to do that, but you need to illustrate to me that you understand the argument. So you will not do that if you just cut and paste what I've said. That doesn't illustrate it to me. So I suggest that you read it and study it and, pay attention to what I've said and ask questions if you don't understand. Okay? And I will respond. So, the second argument, which is in paragraph 5, okay. All right. He starts, if you go to paragraph 5, okay, the quote that I'll highlight this quote. I perceived that there were, in the first place, I observed that the great certitude, which by common consent is accorded to these demonstrations, is founded upon that they are clearly conceived in accordance with the rules I have already sorry. Sorry. That's not what I will highlight. I perceive that there was nothing at all in these demonstrations which could assure me of the existence of their object. Thus, for example, supposing a triangle to be given, I distinctly perceived that its 3 angles were necessarily equal to 2 right angles, but I did not on that account perceive anything which could assure me that any triangle existed. Okay, so he's saying, think of a triangle. And there are rules about triangles. The biggest angle is opposite the hypotenuse. Wow, I just pulled that out from high school. Its 3 angles this is the one that he says, are equal to 2 right angles. That is always true. If you are thinking of a triangle, that is by definition, those 2 things are by definition part of what a triangle is. If you're thinking of a triangle and the longest or the biggest angle isn't opposite the hypotenuse, you're not thinking of a triangle. His point is that it's part of the nature or essence. It's part of what makes an object a triangle, that it has these couple of qualities. If you took away those qualities, that shape, that object, whatever it is, would not be a triangle. It could be something else, but it's not going to be a triangle. If something is triangle, it will have those qualities. Now, think about this. If you cut off a person's arm, is he still human? Yes, because what makes a person, or a human, which by the way might be two different things, is not that they have two arms. Human beings are born without arms all the time. They still seem to be human. It looks like maybe being human might have a little something more to do with this ability to choose to be great, morally, rationally, something like that. It seems like if we lack those types of things, that we're not human. Okay? But a triangle lacking two, what the hell is it? 3 angles equal to 2 right angles is no longer a triangle. If it lacks that, it's not a triangle, because that is the essence, the very nature, the definition of a triangle. But what he says is, while I think in my mind I have this little image of a triangle, it's those angles and things that make it a triangle. But I notice that the fact that it only exists in my mind, it doesn't exist in the real world, i.e., that it doesn't actually exist, it's just an idea in my head, that doesn't mean it's not a triangle. His point here is that existence is not part of the essence of a triangle. A thing can be a triangle even if it just exists in my head. Think about a unicorn. They don't exist, actually, but we absolutely have a definition of a unicorn. It's this fantastic creature, horse-like, with a long horn, magical, white, whatever we say. They don't exist. They only exist in my head. But there is an essence of a unicorn. If I add to that list of this thing I'm thinking of, that it breathes fire and teaches philosophy classes and only lives for 2 days and lays eggs, I don't think I'm thinking of a unicorn anymore. I don't know what the hell I'm thinking of, but it's not a unicorn. Because those things are not part of the essence of a unicorn. It has an essence, even though part of its essence is not existence. Because unicorns don't exist. So it is only in my head, but it's still a unicorn. It's the same idea with a triangle. It's in my head, and I can think of it, and it's still a triangle, but it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in the real world. It's just in my head. So he says this is totally unlike one being. By the way, this is also a standard and an important and extraordinary argument in Jewish philosophy. Very serious Jewish philosophy. Probably the greatest Jewish philosopher of all time, Maimonides, who wrote in the Middle Ages, he put forth this kind of idea about God. So this is an important idea, and one that I think has maybe something more worth considering than the first argument. He says that for God, Descartes here says that I can't just think of God. Like, God can't only be a thought in my head. Because part of God's essence is existence. And God is the only being in the universe that cannot only be in my head. Part of the definition of God is existence. This is so because God is perfect. I can think of 2 beings. One that is omniscient, omnipotent, benevolent, omnipresent, perfect, and that doesn't exist. Only a thought in my head. Then I can think of another being that is omniscient, omnipotent, benevolent, perfect, omnipresent, but actually exists. Which one is more perfect? Well, the one that actually exists. given that God is perfect, a perfect being, the greatest of perfections is that you actually exist. So, God, being perfect, must exist. The triangle, on the other hand, is not a perfect being, so it doesn't have to exist. It's not part of its essence, its nature, that it exists. It has other things that are part of its essence or its nature, the angles stuff. That's what make it a triangle. But existence is not part of what makes it a triangle. Same with the unicorn. But existence is part of what makes God God. God would not be God. God would not be a perfect being, in other words, if he did not exist. In order to be perfect, one must exist. Okay? That's the idea. So, again, this argument is, I think, important. And this one, well, I've done a decent amount of work into this argument, and there's a lot to it, and well, anyway, it's worth considering what this might mean. Okay? Anyway, so, well, there you have it. Now, the next thing that I say here, once God's existence has been proven, we can then be certain that the body and the external world exists. And so in paragraph 7, I noted this line, all the things which we clearly and distinctly conceive are true, is certain that that idea, that all the things that we clearly and distinctly conceive are true, that idea is certain only because God is, or God exists, and because he is a perfect being. Okay, and then I noted another line in paragraph 8, all our ideas or notions contain in them some truth, for otherwise it could not be that God, who is wholly perfect, should have placed them in us. These are, here's what he's doing with this next idea. So after he proves the existence of God, which he can prove directly from the existence of the mind, because the first thing that he does is say that I have this imperfection in my mind. Well, I know that my mind exists, so if I have ideas in my mind, I know that those ideas also exist, so I can go on from there, which is what he does. Now, after he finishes proving that God exists, he says, okay, given that God exists, I also know that God is this particular kind of creature. Perfect. Okay? So I can go from there. Here's what we do. So argument 1 and 2, they're not separate arguments. Make sure you understand this. They're not separate arguments. I should really say argument part 1 and 2. They're two parts of one whole argument for the existence of the body and the external world. So here's what he does. Premise 1, deception is an imperfection. He just kind of puts that out there. But his idea is it's a moral imperfection. A perfectly moral being, and by the way, any perfect being at all would be moral, would be virtuous, would be a good thing. That's part of being perfect, is that you're good. There's a real idea here, and this is very, very old, that immoral behaviors are a flaw. They're not just different than moral behaviors, they're actually flawed behaviors. They make you less perfect. So he's going with this idea, and so deception, lying, is immoral, and therefore it is an imperfection. Premise 2, we've already know this. God is perfect. That's part of the idea of God. Okay? Taken together, if God is perfect and deception is not perfect, God, therefore, cannot deceive. God cannot do anything that is not perfect. If deceiving is imperfect, is not perfect, then God cannot deceive anybody. Okay. That follows logically from those two premises that we take as being true. Well, whatever. He takes those as being true. Then, the second portion of this argument, which I've said is argument 2, he doesn't say this right here. This is part of the argument. The Discourse on Method is a really shortened version of a really long text that you should be thanking God I'm not having you read, called the Meditations. So he really expounds these ideas more in there, and I'm taking these ideas from this other text. But he says what he calls a clear and distinct idea. I'm not going to define that. Just understand that it means an idea that I have that isn't coming from a dream or an evil deceiver, that is really legitimately seems to be an authentic idea that I am getting from the world. Okay? Any clear and distinct idea I hold is not a deception created by my mind. I'm not creating that idea. It's coming from the world. And it's not coming from an evil deceiver, and it's not coming from a dream, which would be my mind. And it's not coming from hallucinations because, I'm suffering from something terrible like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Everything's healthy, everything's fine, and I'm really having an experience of my arm. Okay? That's a clear and distinct idea. I have clear and distinct ideas in my mind of my body and the external world. So, I'm having one right now. I'm pretty damn sure I'm not asleep. I'm also pretty damn sure that I'm not hallucinating because I'm not taking any drugs. I'm not schizophrenic. Whatever. I'm pretty sure I'm having a clear and distinct idea of my arm, my body, and the external world. Right? I'm looking around my room and it seems legit. Premise 3. If these ideas were not true, though, God would have to be deceiving me, because it's not me deceiving me. It's not a mental disorder deceiving me. It's not drugs that I've put into me deceiving me. It's not an evil deceiver deceiving me. It's not my senses deceiving me. It's not my sleep deceiving me. There's only one other option. If I have this idea of my arm, and it's none of those things deceiving me, the only other thing it could be is God. But we know God cannot deceive, because that's an imperfection. Therefore, the body and the external world must exist. I have ideas of them. I'm not deceiving myself. The only other option is if it's God. But God would never do that to me, because God is perfect, benevolent, does not deceive. So, knowing now that God exists, and knowing that that entails, perfection, and that perfection entails moral goodness, benevolence, then I can know that everything else exists. Okay. I hope you followed all of that. So, again, any questions? If you feel embarrassed about asking questions, you should not. You really, really, really shouldn't. But if you do, you can email me, and I'll explain something more thoroughly. But try to put them into the open forum that I have in the discussions tab. Okay? So, good luck, guys.